What's up, folks? It's time. So I did prime this with my part one and part two of our Scum meta review, where we talked about what's working so far, and then we talked a little bit about the bad stuff. Um, Today, I really want to talk about the things that I don't think that players are really trying to kind of do a deep dive on the faction, talk about a bunch of different pilots and upgrades that have a lot of potential, but may or may not have seen table time, at least not in competitive results. And there may be people testing this stuff. I just haven't seen it, so I just wanted to make sure to highlight it. Couple cool things about this. Number one, this is fairly timely because we're in sort of the home stretch to Worlds where we're unlikely to get another points or major meta disruption before Worlds. Maybe the Battle of Endor pack. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe the Alpha Class Starwing. We'll see. We'll see if those come out. But until then, this is the meta we've got. We've had Scum experimented with quite a bit, and now that more people have their Worlds invites, we're seeing some of the more competitive players experiment a bit more in the faction. So this is timely, again, because of just where we are in the year, and then also because people have been trying Scum again. So let's go ahead and give it a bit of a boost and see what we can do. Couple quick caveats here. Number one, I am looking at this from a competitive perspective. So I'm considering this as things that are standard in the current Atomic Mass Games 2.5. So there are black box treatment. They're the things that you could bring to a tournament in 2.5 and standard. We're not going to talk about extended stuff. We're just going to talk about Scum and things that could appear in a tournament. I also want to do a quick shout out, of course, to the venerable Gold Squadron podcast for all the terrific work they do, but then also the Planning Phase Syndicate a couple weeks back had a really good breakdown. It was all like 5 minutes long, but they did a really good job highlighting some of the things that are coming up with Scum and some of the things kind of holding the faction back a bit right now competitively. So let's see, checking my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. A couple real quick things I wanted to go ahead and lay out. So I mentioned the Planning Phase Syndicate. One of the big things that they highlighted is that Scum doesn't have a backbone or workhorse ship. So this was historically the Kirax, which I hope we never have to spell again. Leave that thing and give us something else. And that would be a ship in the 3 to 5 point range, probably more in the 4 than not, but maybe the occasional 3, that has a native 3 attack dice, has some shields, has a decent amount of hit points, and has 2 evade dice at least. Now we're talking about your X-Wing. So your standard like backbone ship where you could run 5 of them and have a fairly competitive chance. A couple key things that were mentioned in that is that they do have shields, which is really important. They do have native 3 red dice, with the biggest thing highlighted there by the Planning Phase Syndicate, that means you can throw 4 dice at range 1. Where if you have like a conditional situational 3 dice, it's not the same threat level, because if you get at range 1, it usually takes that away. You can compare like the Rogue class fighter is sort of the Scum version of that currently, and it's got a native 2 attack dice. And if you do make up for that by throwing an expensive cannon on there to give it 3 dice, not only to use up almost all the ship's loadout, or in some cases all of the ship's loadout, but then also it doesn't do anything for you at range 1. You're still throwing 3 dice at range 1. So that's one of the things we're missing, and kind of a weird design space for Scum. I'm going to go ahead and dunk on the faction real quick for a minute before we dive into some of the better stuff. And by dunk on it, I mean talk about some of the ways where it's really it is an uphill fight right now. So one of the key things is that, again, we don't have that backbone ship. But even more than that, in the 6 point range for Scum, there's some really strong stuff. There's a lot of very strong stuff at 6 points. But then if you get above that, your 7 to 8 and 9 have some real issues or just aren't really worth it compared to the 6s. And then if you get below 6, especially in 5, I think there's one 5 point ship worth taking that we're going to talk about. And then if you get into the 3 and 4 or 4 and 3, there are a handful of pilots and ships that are worth taking. But each one, you have to be aware that you're taking kind of a sacrifice to bring that ship, as opposed to upping to a 6 or going down a bit to a more efficient ship. So we'll get to that. Another thing I want to make sure to highlight is I'm going to mention a kind of a mechanic old hat players talk about a lot, which is not a concept, that is your floor and your ceiling. You'll hear that a lot in the podcast and on different review things where they talk about the floor and the ceiling. That is the absolute peak, like your upper average of the best that any individual thing is going to perform, that being your ceiling, and then the worst average that it's going to perform being your floor. And so if a ship has a high ceiling, it can perform exceptionally well in extreme cases. If it has a low floor, that means that it can perform particularly badly in extreme cases. And depending on how extreme those are, it'll determine how close you are to your floor at any given time, and then how high you are to your ceiling. And we're talking about this in terms of the points invested in the ship, and then the points you're likely to get back. The reason I want to highlight that right away is because one of these ships that does kind of meet the definition of a backbone both at the very upper end and then kind of in the middle 4-point range for Scum, is the Fang Fighter. Now, I love Fang Fighters. They're one of my favorite ships in the game. I love flying them. They're so much fun. But from a competitive perspective, if you have a ship that you're going to bring consistently to a tournament and expect to win, you need that ship to have a high ceiling. You need to have a high floor where it can't ever perform that badly. And you want the average to be somewhere on the table. You want a positive average to the point where if you put down a 4-point ship, you will get 5 points back. So you want a minimum positive ratio of these ships to not. And Fangs have a phenomenal ceiling. Flown very well. If you're very lucky living on your green dice and some of your mods, they can do exceptionally well, but their floor is rock bottom. And I'm going to pick on one in particular, and that is Fen Rao, who's the current staple of the entire Scum faction, the one that most competitive players and most kind of list builders will say, start your list with Fen. Fen is a 6-point ship with 4 hull and no shields. Yes, he's got 3 evade dice, but he doesn't have the evade action. He can roll an extra green die at range 1 when you're in the most dangerous possible spot. Yes, Fangs have ways to mitigate things where they're more durable at range 1, but they're still taking the most offense back. And that's one of those things where Scum has all of these cool things that situationally are good, but in this case, the situation is the worst possible scenario that happens to work out somewhat in favor of the Fang Fighter. So you're talking about a 6-point ship that in the entire game, every single turn, every single shot is one unlucky shot from blowing up. So Fen has a pretty phenomenal ceiling. You will see games where he just runs the table and kills everything by himself and gets 15 points. That's exceedingly rare, even for the best players out there. His floor is one of the worst floors in the entire game, where you throw a 6-point ship on the board and it dies immediately at turn 2 or 3 in the first engagement. That's a problem, because if you want to have a competitive tournament list, you need it to perform well. You need it to perform consistently. You need it to have a positive return on investment basically every single game, or at least neutral. And of course, that's not always going to happen. You'll have bad matchups, whatever. But the thing is that Fen Rao in particular, and Fang Fighters in general, are a huge liability. If you run up against a bad matchup, you have some bad luck. There are so many different ways where things can go wrong, and your Fang Fighter will just blow up in your face. And that's the problem, is that if you lean on Fang Fighters as a backbone of your list, it will not be consistent. You won't have that consistent performance to the point where you actually carry it all the way to the final table, no matter how good you are. And that's a lot of what we've been seeing, where the bigger events, the major events where Scum is played heavily, often a lot of Fang Fighters, and you can see that they just don't quite make the cut. They don't get all the way. Not because the list is bad, it's because the list is inconsistent. And that's kind of a downside for Scum in general, but particularly Fang Fighters. So I wanted to make sure to highlight that right in the beginning. I also do want to say that that is doubly a problem right now, because we're in a competitive meta that we haven't seen since kind of the middle late end of 1.0, the first edition of the game, where there are so many lists on the board that are beefy, have multiple arcs, have a lot of mods, have multiple shots, that it is a really, really unfriendly time in the game for small base ships that don't have the ability to take an unlucky hit. So Fang Fighter is in a very bad spot competitively right now, just in general. That may change at some point based on what lists are out there, but that is a constant thing to keep in mind right now. Anyway, so without further ado, that was a lot. We'll go ahead and talk about some of the things that Scum does really, really well before we look at the ships and upgrades. Number one, I mentioned that 6-point. They have a lot of really, really good 6-point ships, and a lot of those are medium or large bases, mostly large, and a lot of those large bases have 2 evade dice. Scum is the single most dodgy large base ship faction in the game. They have the highest number of 2 evade die large bases and 2 evade die medium bases. And even with their shared stuff, right? So the fire spray, 2 evade dice, the gauntlet that most factions have access to, now the outrider, all of those are things that other factions have, but the other factions then don't have, say, the JumpMaster or the Lancer, but also they don't always have the fire spray. So just even if it's only by a couple chassis, Scum has a really, really good proportion of ships that both have a lot of hit points and then also have high evade. The flip side, though, is from the design space that Scum ships tend to have a low ratio of shields to hull, where they have a bunch of hull and very few shields. So they are still vulnerable to crits, even on those bigger ships, and they will start to burn down, especially when we talk about some of the ones that don't have 2 evade dice, going to be largely your YV666s. So we've covered the basics. I have talked too much. I'm going to keep talking now. And then let's go ahead and share my screen. And we're going to actually take a look at some of these individual upgrades and pieces. And now the biggest stuff I want to make sure to highlight is going to be some of it's going to be meme worthy, some of it's going to be actually competitive. If you're a kitchen table gamer, all of this is going to be good and you should roll out once in a while. But I do want to talk about all this stuff to go ahead and talk about the things that may just be waiting for their time in the sun. So we'll go ahead and go through this. I want to throw some memes, throw some competitive stuff out. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So right off the bat, I've got a whole page full of JumpMaster 5Ks. So just to talk about it, it's got a 2-die turret primary gun, 2 evade dice, 6 hull, 3 shields, and then you got any initiative from 6 to 1. Now, the top one being, of course, Dengar, and all of these actually are 6 points except Manaroo, who we're going to talk about in a second. We'll start with Dengar, who's one who's actually seeing some play. We've got quite a few players experimenting with him, and he's initiative 6, which is phenomenal, 11 loadout, and is 6 points. And then also has the ability after you defend, if the attacker is in your front arc. So this only has the turret gun, so it has to have a front arc attack. The turret has to be in that front arc. You may spend 1 charge, and it's got 1 recurring charge, to perform a bonus attack against the attacker. First thing I want to highlight is that you can never have more than 1 bonus attack in a turn for a single ship. And that's important because the upgrades I have put in this guy. Now, Dengar's got some fairly standard builds, right? You've got your... And we'll actually do a standard build in a minute, but I wanted to highlight this one because this one is weird. So I've got Cutthroat, which is just after another friendly ship range 0 to 3 is destroyed, if it is limited or has the Cutthroat upgrade, it's always going to be limited. You may remove 1 of your orange or red tokens, usually a stress, or recover 1 non-recurring charge on your ship card or 1 of your equipped upgrade cards. You could recover a torpedo, you could recover a charge on the pain bot, which we'll talk about in a second, but usually that's used to remove stress. And that's why I have it on there. That could also be expert handling, so you could change that red barrel roll into a white one. Should be more or less the same thing. Let's actually look at that dial real quick too. So it's got focus to rotate, lock to rotate, and then it's got the barrel roll action. Now, anytime we're talking about a JumpMaster, I do want to be sure to highlight that 2 evade dice, which is phenomenal durability on a ship this size with this many hit points. But then also that the dial is terrible. No blue hards. Your banks are only blue to the left and they're white to the right, and you only have 2 turnaround maneuvers, either a 3 sloop to the left, which is actually pretty cool, or a 4K straight. Now, one thing to highlight about this is that it's always been asymmetrical, so anytime you can turn left, it's easier for this ship to pull off, so it's very tempting and sort of the standard thing to start this on the right side of the board. A fair number of trickier players will start it on the left side of the board to be surprising, and then at some point during the game, you use your 4K or your sloop to then suddenly have your turn-ins facing at your deployment zone, suddenly become your easier maneuvers. So that's a way you can kind of cheese that and kind of play unpredictably. Because he is initiative 6, he will be deploying late in the game. Now, why is my build weird? Because I threw plasma torpedoes on here, which does give you a front arc attack that is not the turret. So you could have the turret out of place. And as long as you have a target lock, you could still fire those plasma torpedoes defensively with Dengar's ability, because it does not say primary, it just says front arc. But then I also have the punishing 1 title, which means if that primary turret is in the forward arc, you roll 1 additional attack die, and then you swap a crew slot for an astromech slot. That really is critical to make the punishing 1 a viable ship, because it gives it a 3-die primary gun, because before it only had the 2-die primary. Problem being, whenever you rotate your turret away from that front, it changes from a 3-die gun to a 2-die gun, and you lose your crew slot, which is punishing, as per the name. That wasn't always the case. That's something that was changed in 2.0. The JumpMaster knows what it did. In 1.0, the JumpMaster was an absolute monstrosity. It was way too good. But it was over-nerfed the other way. So now it's definitely quite a bit weaker. But that's still good. So you got a 3-die primary gun that you can shoot twice. Now, we're getting to the weird upgrade. So I've got Miggs Mayfield on here, who is a gunner, 4 points, who says after you perform a forward arc attack, you may perform a rear arc attack or a turret attack as a bonus attack against a different target with 1 or more red or orange tokens. This is a weird thing that a lot of people try to make work, but I'm going to talk up why it's so good on a JumpMaster, especially Dengar or Manaroo, one of the ones that can take the title. The reason being that he only specifies a front arc attack, does not specify it's a primary or secondary weapon, which most of the other bonus attack upgrades will. So that will work to where you can shoot your plasma torpedoes and then follow up with a primary shot on something else in your front arc. Now, that is better nowadays because we've got higher ship count lists, so we end up in more cases where you will have multiple things to shoot at. Now, of course, the condition is it has to have a one or more red or orange token. If you have something like if one of your friendly ships has a target lock on that ship, or if you have a way to give it a strain, which there are a lot of ways to do it. If you have a way to give it a stress, or if it has a stress, there are a lot of ways to trigger that. So that's not as bad of a downside as it sounds, especially because if you have a couple ion, like an ion cannon, ion torpedo, whatever in here, any way to generate ion tokens, those tokens will never go away until the ship does an ion maneuver. So if you tag a large base ship with a single ion, you can then Migs Mayfield that sucker for the rest of the game and just guarantee that that's going to be on there. So that's the thing you can do. But Dengar already gets bonus attacks. Why would you ever do this? The big reason that I want to play with this and want to see it used more is that, yes, Dengar gets bonus attacks, but they're only if he's taking fire. I've played plenty of games with Dengar where the opposing team just completely ignores him. And yes, he's got a 3-die primary attack, but it's ignorable if they are going to objectives and going up against the rest of the list. So they can straight up ignore him, or they can shoot him out of his arc and not worry about those return shots coming in. It's not a hard ship to fly around. It's faster than most large bases, but it still has some maneuver weaknesses, especially once it's stressed, which is why I typically run it with Agile Gunner. But for this, the big things being, if you were to take any other Initiative 6 ship in the game, and I were to say, hey, you could get 2 shots with this thing, where you could shoot a torpedo and then fire a 3-die primary, that would be really, really exciting for any pilot who didn't already have bonus attacks. And that's kind of my point here, is that is still really, really good, even though it has native bonus attacks, because you can always stick to the ability. But in those cases where you have a lock, you have 2 good targets, you can then take your bonus shot without taking any shots back at Initiative 6. This is something that has a lot of damage potential. Now, the problem being, the biggest thing that you lose is mods. So it's pretty common to see Dengar with Predator, so you can have a passive mod on both of your shots if something is in bullseye. And also the Pain bot, as called R5P8, which is when you perform an attack against a defender in your forward arc, you may spend 1 charge to reroll 1 attack die. If the rerolled result is a crit result, suffer 1 damage. Now, the downside sucks, which is classic Scum, where you get some bonus that always has a downside. But what makes that good is it's a passive reroll that you don't have to do any actions for, that you have on both your main attack and your bonus attacks. So it is a bummer that you can't build this MiGs build with that. I don't think you can, because even if you use a cheaper cannon in place of those plasma torpedoes, because it does have a cannon slot, you could do an ion cannon instead of plasma torpedoes and change cutthroat to a 1-point talent. But yeah, or you could do a heavy laser cannon for 1 point less, and then you could still have Predator. You could do different things with that. Those would still work, but that's a bullseye only gun, so iffy. But there are definitely things you can try with that. There's quite a bit you could do here. And again, the biggest advantage being that you can then shoot twice at Initiative 6 before most other ships in the game shoot, and you don't have to take any damage back. Whereas with his normal bonus attack, all of the agency is on your opponent. So worth a try. We'll see if that's meme worthy or if it's actually good if people try it. See. Next up, we have Manaroo. Same stat line, trades the Initiative 6 for Initiative 3, but swaps the 11 loadout for 15, significantly better, and then also has the access to the title. So it has that primary 3 green die attack, which is really terrific. Then I've got the exact same build on here, except with Manaroo, I'm also able to throw an R5P8. Manaroo doesn't care as much about losing the bonus attack because she doesn't have one native. Her ability is at the start of the engagement phase, you may choose a friendly ship at range 0 to 1. If you do, transfer all green tokens assigned to you to that ship. So she can be a battery for other ships. It's a nice kind of quiet focus. Also one that was punished back in 1.0. I believe that ability was up to range 2. It may even have been up to range 3. And I think it was all tokens. So you could just shed locks, everything. So you could lock focus and then just give that to another ship, which was obviously much more powerful. But so she, again, you can do the same build, but you have R5P8, which you can use those rerolls both for your torpedoes and for your other follow-up shot. So she does get the passive mods that you lose on Dengar. In addition to that, Megs and the plasma torpedoes, with the downside being that she is Initiative 3. But the other upside being that she's 5 points. So there's a lot you can do on here. The more classic Manaroo build is, instead of Migs Bayfield, you use the gunner Gar Saxon, who is, while you perform the target lock action, you can only choose an object in your front arc or your rear arc. While you perform a primary attack, if the defender is in your forward arc or your rear arc, you may remove 1 red or orange token to roll 1 additional die to a maximum of 4. Now you see the advantage there. That turns Manaroo from a 3-die attack into a unmodded proton torpedo, which is great. But there is the downside where they have to have the token. You lose a lot of access on your target locks. And he's 6 points. He's really, really expensive to take an unmodded shot, and it's a maximum of 4, so it's no benefit at range 1. You're still throwing 4 dice at range 1 because of your punishing one title, but I still just have mixed feelings about that one. So there we go. Those are our first starters. We're going to go through the rest of these fairly quickly. Got 2 more JumpMasters. I wanted to go ahead and highlight Nom Lum. And Nom Lum, this is actually a build that made a tournament appearance recently and did quite well, because Nom Lum and Tel Trevura, the next ones we're going to look at, have 2 cannon slots. So instead of taking a single cannon, they can take 2 cannons. So with Nom, what I've been talking about this whole time is that Miggs Mayfield option. Now for him, he doesn't have access to the title. So instead of Miggs throwing a 3-die attack, it's only a 2-die attack, but still can be good. But it still works because you use your synced cannons, and then you can get a bonus shot out of your turret arc. And one of the great things about Nom is that he has, after you become the defender, if the attacker is not in your mobile arc, you must rotate your mobile indicator to a standard arc the attacker is in. So if people are shooting at you, you're getting free rotate actions so that they're always in arc, which is really good with Miggs because that means you'll always have a shot on something. The downside being that opponents can cheese that, or if they have 2 different ships shoot at this at different initiatives, the ship that shoots second will be the one your turret is left pointing at, and he's initiative 1, so he's going to shoot last. But he is also 5 points. So he's another budget 5-point option that can play well. And at initiative 1, he's got some pretty strong advantages on some missions that where acting first is an advantage. Is that a great build? Probably not. Another upgrade I want to go ahead and talk about that's particularly good with Nom is the Gunner Dengar. And Dengar Gunner, who obviously you can't take with Dengar Pilot in the same squad, but Dengar Gunner is 6 points, says after you defend, if the attacker is in your firing arc, you may spend 1 charge. If you do, roll 1 attack die unless the attacker chooses to remove 1 green token. On a hit or crit result, the attacker suffers 1 damage. So it's free auto damage or token stripping on the ship that's already automatically aiming this ability at whatever shoots at it. So it is really good. Doesn't do anything for his personal attacks except strip tokens, and since he's shooting last, that's still good because that means he will likely have softer targets. And the reason this guy has Sakatra Vizago on there is because you can mess around with that, but also because he only had 1 point left on the build. But Sakatra says, during the end phase, you may choose 2 illicit upgrades equipped to friendly ships at range 0 to 1, tiny bubble. If you do, you may exchange these upgrades. End of game, return these upgrades to their original ships, which is basically blank. So you can do things like if a ship has used, say it's contraband cybernetics, and another ship also has contraband cybernetics, can swap them, I believe, so that you can get another use of contraband cybernetics on the same ship. Likewise, something like you could trade a used contraband cybernetics for a dead man switch and have your burning fire or your trailing flames ship actually become a dangerous piece again and do something wonky. There's potential with Sakatro, but But that is actually one big thing to highlight with Nom. With Nom and the next one I'm going to talk about Tel, they don't lose the crew slot because they don't have the title. They don't have the title, so they don't get that offensive benefit. But then you have a JumpMaster that has a crew slot, which can be pretty great. And since they have those synced cannons, they do have a fairly consistent 3-die gun out the front. But again, they just don't get that at range 1, where they're only throwing 2 dice. Excuse me, only throwing 3 dice. Yeah, well, and actually the downside of the synced cannon is they don't actually have an attack at all at range 1. So if a ship gets into range 1, they're not taking 4 dice, they're taking no shots unless your turret is pointed that way, and then they'll take 3 dice. So important to note. Go ahead and talk about the last of the JumpMasters on this list. This is another 6-point one, but he does have the highest loadout by a mile, being 20 out of 20. Also has the slots for synced laser cannon, so he has the 2 cannon slots. I threw Predator on here just for fun, although I don't think that's a great idea because it only works as a primary weapon, doesn't work with synced laser cannons. And I've got Miggs on here too. Now, that is kind of a weird one, but I went ahead and tried it just to go ahead and see how it would fit with the 20 loadout, because that's the most points you have to play with on any of these if you're going to try the Miggs trigger with the turret and the synced lasers. And I keep coming back to Miggs because he's really good on these because, again, their primary gun is a turret. The best thing being because it can be a 3-die turret on the punishing one carriers, but it's still not nothing on these guys. So it's one of the only Scum ships where it's really kind of worth trying it out, and one of the only ships in the game that can really benefit from that. Now, Nom Lum was initiative 1. Tel Trevura is initiative 4. To go ahead and kind of talk him up, his ability is if you would be destroyed, you may spend 1 charge, and he's got 1 non-recurring charge. If you do, discard all of your damage cards, suffer 5 damage, so 5 face-down damage cards, and place yourself in reserves instead. At the start of the next planning phase, place yourself within range 1 of your player edge. Now, these things take a while to bring down. I mentioned the stats and then the 2 evade. So he will die, then he'll come back and you'll redeploy him in the following turn with 1 hull and then 3 shields. So he's still got 4 hit points and 3 shields right there. He just comes back into play with and doesn't count as, if I remember the rules correctly, he does count as destroyed, but you still have him on the board, so he still has an impact on the game beyond getting blown up. And this also brings us to another really interesting crew option for Scum that you never see, but he's terrific, is Queel. This is action, so you take an action to do this. Roll 1 attack die for each damage card you have. On redeploy, and you can use this before he dies, but if he dies on redeploy, that's 5 dice. You are rolling 5 hit dice for each damage card you have. For each hit result, repair a face-up ship damage card. So that's better before he's destroyed, so you can go ahead and remove some crits. For each crit result, repair 1 face-down damage card. So you can go ahead and just get rid of some of those damage he's taken from that redeploy. For each blank result, remove 1 orange token, which is not great. And then for each focus result, gain 1 focus token. Now, your odds are quite high of getting hits and eyeballs. You may get some crits, which is good, and then you may get some blanks to go ahead and remove some orange tokens. Now, he's not really taking orange tokens, so it's just okay, but it's still one of those things, if you're going to focus anyway, this is a ship that would really benefit from going ahead and just doing this, just in case, because it's not a focus action, so this is a way where you can get additional focus tokens beyond just a focus action if you have a way to coordinate or get that another time. But then also just the opportunity to just pull off some of those face down damage cards and get a focus token in the same action is terrific. This is a weird piece. He's also 6 points. I think Nom and Manaroo kind of land best out of these 4 because they are 5 points, which is that obscure and rare 5-point hole. But it's still definitely worth mentioning Dengar and Teltraver as well. Tel, for that sheer durability, is an obnoxious piece where if they waste fire in him, and you can make him really obnoxious to the point where they will want to waste fire on him. He can just be a very sticky piece that stays in the game. And one of the issues with Scum is I mentioned that sort of points cost limitation where you end up with squads that have very low ship count, or they just don't have a ton of quality. So having a ship that stays around even when it's destroyed is super helpful to kind of shore up the rest of your list and just have something functional that is acting late into the game when some of your other stuff may be gone or would just die outright. So definitely a place for Tel. Nom has the really interesting ability, and I really like him with that Dengar Gunner. That does take more than half of his loadout, so that's definitely kind of a questionable choice, but see what you can do with him. Another piece I wanted to make sure to mention on these is your Boba Fett Gunner. Comes in at 2 points and reads, while you perform an attack, if there are no other ships in the attack arc, you may change one of your eyeball results to a hit result. So a passive mod straight from focus to hit with no tokens needed, no nothing. And that is phenomenal on a bullseye weapon if you're able to line it up. So on any of these guys, you can rely on their primary cannon, then slap some of these guys you could slap a proton cannon on, others you could slap the heavy laser cannon on, and then you have a passive mod because it's in the attack arc. Not in your forward arc, not in your arc, just the attack arc. So if you're using a bullseye, that narrow attack arc is actually a feature to really give you a chance to trigger this guy. So it's a really interesting piece. Definitely don't sleep on that one. And while I'm talking about these guys, I do want to make sure to highlight that Agile Gunner's 1 point. Now, especially for Dengar and Manaroo, if you're bringing the title, which you should, if you move your arc outside of your forward arc, it then will be you lose an attack die, which is a real bummer. But at the same time, it's still a really, really powerful upgrade because it allows you to move the arc without penalty. So in a turn where you're not going to get a shot, you can go ahead and move that, get your shot, and then for free at the end of that turn, move it back to your front arc when you're going to line it back up. So it can't be overstated how good that is. Even if it does have you taking less than great shots, it gives you the opportunity to actually get those shots. Greedo is another extremely common upgrade on your JumpMaster. Especially Dengar, because people want to make sure you have an incentive to shoot him, which I get. So like so Greedo reads, while you perform an attack, you may spend 1 charge, and he's got 1 recurring charge, to change 1 hit result to a crit result. So you just straight up get a crit. The problem is if you are shot first or you don't have a shot and you don't use that charge, so like say you don't have anything in arc, or you don't roll any eyeball results, or you don't roll any hit results, so you can't change to a crit. If you roll all crits or all blanks, you can't spend that charge. Every single shot that comes at you while you have that charge up can change a hit to a crit. Every single one, no matter how many there are. And if you have Greedo instead of Agile Gunner, it's a lot worse to go ahead and rotate your arc back. So I think the downside is way too high on Greedo to be worth taking him. But I understand people do really like it, especially as an incentive to have enemy players shoot at Dengar, because you want them to shoot at Dengar so you get his bonus attacks. You don't want him to be ignorable, but I don't think that makes him ignorable. I don't think that makes him unignorable enough to justify the downside, because all your opponent's going to do is wait till they have shots out of that front arc so they don't take the counter shot, and so they get free crits on you. And that is a ship that has a bunch of hull where you don't want to be taking auto crits. So I don't recommend Greedo. Agile Gunner, though, you can also fake people out with this. So end phase, rotate your arc to the left. And they're like, oh, okay, he's going to shark roll around and make sure he gets me in left arc. Then what you can do is do a move and then do one of your linked actions, say focus to rotate, and rotate your arc back to where you want it. And then suddenly they're out of position and you have a really nice shot on them. And then you can also then rotate your arc again for free because it's not an action. Now that is a risky play because you end up dealing with stress, and these jump masters don't like stress. But that's the kind of thing you can do with Agile Gunner, is it lets you move your arc for any reason without a cost. It's very good, especially for 1 point. So certainly don't sleep on that one. So we're done talking about the jump master a bit. I'll go ahead and skip on here. Definitely a solid piece, and you can, of course, take more than one of them if you have the models. Dengar is the one that's kind of historically performed the best, and he's the most just flat stat-wise good. He's a very reliable piece at that 6 point. But Manaroo is the single best 5 point ship in Scum. So certainly worth looking at, even if you end up taking both of them. And I find that Manaroo's that 5 points fills a convenient hole in a lot of lists. That's a really good one to have in your pocket whenever you are list building. So we'll go ahead and jump down here. I'm going to go and talk about one of my favorite, most ridiculous pieces in the game, and that is Tapusk. He's an HWK that costs 4 points that is not named Kanan. Dude, this is the worst ship in the Scum. Why would you ever talk about the ship? Let's talk about the ship. Number one, he's initiative 5, which already is a feature by itself. And then the other thing is that during his ability reads, during the end phase, before an enemy ship in your turret arc receives recovers one recurring charge or one recurring force, you may spend 2, and he's got 2 recurring charges, so he gets this every other turn. Doesn't show on this, but that's what he's got. If you do, that ship does not recover that charge or that force. Now look at Dengar. He gets that bonus charge at the end of the turn. He just recovers his charge. Any force user recovers a force charge. Tapusk every other turn just says, oh, your Vader's out of force. No, you don't get any back. You're not getting that back, which is really good. But the biggest reason that I always bring him up is he's initiative 5, and he's a terrific carrier for Hondo Onaka crew, who I cannot stress enough how good this crew is. He's 8 points, so very hard to justify. But his ability is action. Choose 2 ships at range 1 to 3 of you that are friendly to each other. Now, again, they're range 1 to 3 of you. So if you're in the middle of the board, that is up to range 3 in both directions. They don't have to be within range 3 of each other. Coordinate one of the chosen ships and then jam the other, ignoring range restrictions. So that is a range 3 jam or a range 3 coordinate. And it says you can do this either to opponents or to friendlies. So if you need to jam a Han, or you need to jam a target lock or a focus off of Luke, you can do that, and then you coordinate Sabine, and who cares? The ability to jam at range 3 is so good, and he can do it every single turn. And there is almost always something you can coordinate that you don't mind coordinating. This also is Hondo Onaka crew, so it does that if you coordinate a stressed ship, that ship then can't do anything. So there's always opportunity where you jam one ship, coordinate a stress ship, and oh, you're at home free. That's great. Likewise with your friendlies, being able to coordinate one of your ships up to range 3 at initiative 5 is terrific. Like, obviously this guy has almost no damage output. He's got a 2-die turret, 3 hull, 2 shields, and he costs 4 points. There's a big risk in taking him, but I always think that that piece is so good that it is definitely worth considering in your lists if you have a hole for this, if you could benefit from this kind of ability, these kind of abilities. And we're going to look at some lists with him in them in a minute. You look at, so I've played against a Vader, a Rear Admiral Churno, Rack or Chirpy, however you want to call him, with Vader crew on him. So this sucker was reinforced every turn and was recovering a force charge to use that Vader crew. This shuts him down completely. So you jam to get rid of that reinforce, and then at the end phase, when he's trying to recover that Vader crew charge, you're just like, nah, you don't get that back. Likewise, I mentioned Luke earlier. He's got that jam to make sure that Luke doesn't have the focus to fire his proton torpedoes. And then you also can have him not recover a force in the end phase. So then Luke is now much less offensively powerful and has less defense because his force may be uncharged or maybe spent. It's there. I mean, obviously it's better just to blow up Luke, but that is such a good utility piece, both for coordinating your own ships to high initiative and then also jamming opposing ships at high initiative. It's really good. That should be in more lists. People should try it more. I definitely think that combo has something there. Next up, we're going to talk about Torkil Mux, who has actually made tournament appearances recently. And this is one I don't swear by, but someone else tried this, so I had to make sure to mention it. Same stat line as Tapesk. And let's look at that Hawk dial here. The dial's not awful, actually. It's got the 3 turns are red. 2 turns are blue, which is nice. Or excuse me, are white, which is nice. The 2 and 3 banks are white. The 4 straight is white. The 3, 2, and 1 straight, and then the 1 banks are all blue. And then it has a 0 stop. Also has a red boost, a white rotate, a red jam. So this ship by itself also can jam. So at range 0 to 2, what is it? Range 0 to 1 in a bubble, and then range 0 to 2 forward arc, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe bullseye, but something forward. But then also has the focus to red rotate, lock to red rotate, and again, that red boost. So a common upgrade for these guys is going to be your engine upgrade, give them the white boost. That's a thing. And they all have decent loadout. Tapesk has 10. If you don't take Hondo, he's got more on there. And Torkil has 8, so there's quite a bit you can do with this. Now, but Torkil's special for his ability that at the start of the engagement phase, you may choose one ship in your firing arc. If you do, that ship engages at initiative 0 instead of its normal initiative value this round. So if you're up against a Han and you're like, you're initiative 0, your entire list gets to shoot at that sucker and try to strip off his tokens before he gets a single shot. You can give him awful crits, you can give him terrible stuff going on, you can strip his tokens. That's real good. There's no point where that ability will not help out, and you have, if you build a list that's punishing enough to use that, it can be absolutely fabulous. Fabulous. But he's 5 points. So I wanted to highlight this build that I actually saw, which is the Mandalorian crew. So he gets a white reinforce added to that action bar. Dead Man Switch, just for fun. And then concussion bombs, just to make him an actual threat on this 5-point ship. Putting reinforce on this thing just cracked me up so hard. It's got 2 green dice, so it's actually got decent durability. It's got the 2 shields and 3 hull that we talked about from a backbone ship. Like, this is not the worst thing in the world. And the list that ran this that I heard about just completely, it was him, and then completely filled the rest of the list with Spice Runners, the Initiative 1 generic Hawk that we'll talk about in a second. Totally ridiculous. Did not win a tournament, but did perform significantly better than it should have. But I had to highlight him. At 5 points, he's a really hard take to get. Until we get more efficient, more kind of worthwhile taking ships at cost 4 to 3, that's going to be tough to get in there. It's even tough getting Tapesk's 4 cost in there, a 5 cost Hawk. That's hard. But anyway, his ability is so good that there are definitely places for it. Wanted to highlight it, especially because someone actually took that to a tournament. We had to talk about it. Next up, we're going to go completely the opposite direction and talk about Boba. Now, right now, Boba is 9 squad points, leaving you only 11 others to fill the entire rest of your squad. And he's a fire spray. So he's got 6 hull, he's got 4 shields, which is really good. And he's got 2 green dice, and then he's got a native bow tie front and back arc, 3 out the front or 3 out the back. It doesn't have to rotate or anything, just has that. And then Boba Fett's ability, of course, is while you defend or perform an attack, you may reroll 1 of your dice for each enemy ship at range 0 to 1, which is phenomenal. And he's initiative 5, and there's no limit to that. He just had kind of a hit here. Okay, so his loadout went down. His squad points stayed the same, which are still quite high. But then so many other ships in the game, especially in other factions, had their loadout or their squad points reduced. So overall ship counts went down, which is tough for Boba because that means he's got more shots on him. Now, also, he lost the loadout to the point where it is a lot harder to fit on Force Crew, which a lot of players out there consider Force Crew to be one of the things that you have to take. Now, I completely disagree with that. It's got basically every single slot and multiple mod slots. There are so many things you can do with this ship. You don't want to be tied to any single build. You should experiment with this guy. And in current points, it's actually totally possible to run a Boba Fett in a 5-ship list. So Boba plus 4. And you can do that. And that's a very, very competitive list and one that I think that more people need to take a look at. So here I am proselytizing for Boba to show off my personal favorite build. And this is one that I actually took to Lone Star Open this past summer. You got Cutthroat to recover your charges. You've got the Mandalorian, which gives you the white reinforce action. Also lets you recover non-recurring force, but that's blanked on this because I don't have any non-recurring force. And then I've got Marauder on there. So if rear attack, you can get a free reroll in addition to Boba's reroll. So you're rerolling multiple dice most of the time. And then Veteran Tail Gunner. Veteran Tail Gunner, of course, being good because it means that after you perform a primary forward attack, you may perform a bonus primary attack. I mentioned the higher ship count. That's really important in this specific case. So that's a really, really powerful upgrade to have. But it's especially good on Boba because Boba gets free rerolls. And again, there's no limit. So if you have 2 or 3 ships at range 1 of you, you're suddenly rerolling all of your attack dice on both your primary attack and your bonus attack. And that's the thing too. Like the Boba's reroll is really good. Obviously, having force points on here is really, really good because it would let you have a passive mod on top of your rerolls no matter what action you did. But I personally thought the 2 points for the reinforce was a little bit better, especially in this weird combination. So the other upgrades down here I've got are Burnout Thrusters, which is it gives you the slam action, single charge. After you perform a slam action, lose 1 charge. Boom. Then you may gain 1 deplete token to remove 1 disarm token. So instead of not attacking at all that turn, you attack with 1 less die, which with Veteran Tail Gunner still means you can get both shots. And this is really a delivery system where the slam is after you perform a maneuver, you do a slam action, and that is another maneuver of that same speed. And the dial on this thing has a lot of options. And then once this charge is gone, you lose your Burnout Slam action, except we've got Cutthroat. So he can, especially in that 5-ship list, recover that and Burnout Slam multiple times. Now, I use that as a delivery system for Boba to get him into the thick of things where he starts triggering his rerolls. And that just is so effective. And one of the really challenging things with Boba is he is 1 ship that costs 9 points. You need him to have an impact on your game. And for me, one of his biggest weaknesses is he'll fly out of the fight and then have to take a while to turn back around. But with Burnout Slam, you charge that with Cutthroat, you do it too hard, and boom, you've done a K turn, except it was white. Yeah, it's good. The other thing being, I don't think you can do that while stressed. No, okay. And that got me in trouble because I wasn't able to do this. Well, but so you can do that in combination with Contraband Cybernetics, so that in a turn you know you're going to do it, you can Contraband and then Burnout Slam even if you are stressed. But I opted to take Advanced Slam, which is after you perform a slam action, if you fully executed the maneuver, you may perform a white action on your action bar, treating that action as red, which goes back to the Mandalorian. You deliver this sucker right into the middle of the fight. You trade 1 deplete for still being able to shoot after slamming, and then you still can do your white reinforce because you have the Mandalorian. You got your offense, you got your defense, you got your getting into the thick of stuff really quickly, and then you have your bonus shots. I love this build. And it's one of those things where if you're taking a 9-point ship, being able to shoot twice heavily modded is really, really good. So there's my Boba build. I really love it. I will proselytize about that and talk it up forever. But that's it. But there are some alternative builds. Over here, I've got Cutthroat, Burnout Thrusters, and then this one uses my other favorite gunner in Scum, which is Bosk. Nobody ever talks about Bosk Gunner. So Bosk says, after you perform a primary attack that misses, if you are not stressed, you must receive 1 stress token to perform a bonus primary attack against the same target. Now, here's the thing. So my Burnout Thrusters build usually relies on delivering Boba smack into the middle, where he's going to get a lot of mileage out of Veteran Tail Gunner. If you're not doing something like that, if you play him a little bit more cagey and keep out of the fight, Bosk is really, really good. I always think of Bosk as a no target lock homing missile, where you make that, say you throw your primary shot, you get Boba's rerolls because Boba gets his rerolls for free. You roll 2 hits and a blank. You still have a target lock focus, so you just have these in the wings. Yeah, well, I'd say you just do your Boba reroll and roll into another blank. But say you've got a whole nother shot, you're still sitting on a focus token. Your opponent has to decide, do I take these 2 hits or do I spend this focus to evade it and then risk getting shot again where I've already spent my defensive focus? So it is, the auto stress is a bummer, but the ability to shoot twice at the same target or not even shoot twice at the same target, have them be like, okay, I'll take the hit to avoid you shooting at me again, is really, really good. And a lot of the builds that I really lean on are really leaned around making sure that my shots against dodgy, squirrely ships actually land. Because I've had so many experiences playing against aces where you get that great 4-day shot and just squirrels out of taking any hits. Bosk is always one thing that I reach to go ahead and deal with that. And he's one of the only bonus attacks that lets you shoot at the same target multiple times. Doesn't let you do damage to it multiple times, but does let you get another crack at it. So you can mulligan and try again. And the fire spray doesn't really care about stress that much. You'll just clear the stress because the dial's pretty good. You've got your 1 banks and straight, your 2 bank and or your 2 straight and your 3 straight are all blue. You can really easily slow roll this thing and just do your banks around and just you get a little bit predictable, but still the stress is not a huge issue. So I really like Bosk. I really like him on Boba again because both of your shots are modded because of Boba's rerolls. And again, you don't have to spend all your offensive mods on the first shot. You can then count on missing, so you get to try again just with a more favorable shot. It's very good, and I'm very surprised more people don't run Bosk Gunner. Definitely one I wanted to make sure to highlight on this. Now, this really isn't a complete build. I've got Quill on there, which is not as good on a Boba Fett build, but I just had him on there just because. I do absolutely love the Burnout Boba, and if you fly Scum, if you ever fly a fire spray and you have not, try to fire spray with Burnout thrusters. You owe it to yourself to try it at least once. Okay, and then we've got Quill, but another crew I really like to mention in Scum is, well, actually there are several I'm going to go ahead and highlight right here and take the time to do it. Mandalorian we talked about. Kira is 2 points. While you move and perform attacks, you ignore obstacles that you are locking. So if you target lock a rock, you can just fly over that sucker and shoot through it as much as you want. And that's been ruled to be the best possible interpretation of that. So if you have trick shot and the opposing ship has something that gives them bonus defense if you shoot through a rock, you can choose to ignore the rock selectively so you have the best possible shot. You ignore their defensive ability, but keep your trick shot. So it's really good, especially for 2 points, especially if you have trick shot, especially if you have heavily modded shots. It's a great one. That is one of the reasons I suspect, if there was reasoning behind it, why Scum didn't get a customizable Outrider, because Kira would have been a natural choice to be like, yeah, okay, I'll take my juke effect and you just don't get your defensive bonus on that. Real good. Another one I wanted to go ahead and talk about is Unkar Plut, who does, I believe, what Chopper Crew does for Rebels. After you partially execute a maneuver, so bump, you may suffer 1 damage to perform 1 white action. Now, that's obviously best if you are bumping into a friendly ship where you're taking damage and you don't get the red focus option, but it does open up the opportunity to go ahead and do non-focus actions after a bump. For example, you could Unkar Plut, and then even if you get a friendly bump, instead of taking the red focus, you could then slam, which is fun. So say someone blocks your Boba into the middle of a scrum where it's going to get just absolutely lit up. You can be like, nah, I'm out, and just slam out of there, which is phenomenal. I really love it. Another one I actually really, really like is IG-88. Well, not this one. IG-11 is what I'm looking for, but we'll stop on Peli. Peli motto, during the system phase, outside of your action phase and all that, you may perform an action on one of your damage cards even while stressed. Super good for 3 points. I want to make sure to highlight her because she's one that could fit into a lot of builds, especially your YVs with multiple crew slots. After you repair a face-up ship damage card, you may roll 1 attack die. On a hit result, repair another face-up ship damage card. On a crit result, expose 1 damage card. And again, all of that is done during the system phase, so it's action independent, so you don't need to waste actions clearing up your damage cards. So if you have like a Tel Travera, she's another really excellent piece to put on instead of Queel, because she's much more reliable. You can remove the bad crit. So here's the thing too. The hit is a lot more likely than the crit. So you could repair face up and then roll Peli and then probably remove that. So you fully repair a card during the system phase without taking an action at all, which is so good. Of course, there's a risk because it's Scum. But definitely take a look at Peli, again, just for the fun. I already talked about the importance of consistency in competitive lists, but that base ability to be able to get rid of a bad crit without taking an action, especially because, perform an action, yeah, but still, like that's very good. And to do it even while stressed. So if you have like, there are a lot of crits out there that you want to get rid of, and that's a very, very strong ability. Situational, of course, but you put it on the right ship, you're going to get it almost every single turn, and if you play your cards right, is a really good piece to include. We'll go ahead and run through some of these others real quick. Bo-Katan, after you perform an attack, if the defender was destroyed, each friendly ship at range 0 to 2 may remove 1 or red or orange token We have talked a lot about stress being a problem in Scum. It's a bigger problem than I'm making it out to be, and she's one of the really good pieces to go ahead and help you get rid of it. You have to, of course, destroy the ship. So she's best in the high offense squad where she is one of the on the carrier that's last to shoot. So one of the lower initiative YVs like Afra is a good carrier for her. We'll get to that in a minute. Ketsu, say you do have a tractor beam or you have the pilot Lats Razzie and the YV in your list somewhere. At the start of the end phase, you may choose one enemy ship at range 0 to 2 in your firing arc. If you do, that ship does not remove its tractor tokens. A strong piece for this one, slap her on Dace Bone Arm, and then put Sarasu in a squad with a tractor beam. Why Dace? Because he's got a forward primary arc because of the title, but then he also has a turret arc, which is a great big bubble that they can't get out of, and that ship will just keep their -1 to green dice forever. Can be very powerful. It's one of those weird things where you need multiple ships to trigger it, and it's kind of situational. So it's fine. Still good. Quill, we talked about L337 is a really good one. While you defend, you may flip this card. If you do, the attacker must reroll all attack dice, which is really good. If they get a hot roll, just have them reroll it. There's not really any possible loss to you, so it's definitely worth considering. And then once she has flipped and you've used that once, it's if you are not shielded, which most Scum has a lot of hull and not a lot of shield, so it's not that hard to trigger. Decrease the difficulty of your bank maneuvers. So that will give most ships in Scum a lot more options to turn or to bank for blues to clear stress, which is really nice. It was designed for the Scum Falcon, but works very well on the Razor Crest, which we'll talk about later. Interesting piece, 4 points, kind of iffy, but it has both the defensive and the utility piece for late game, so it's certainly one to consider. Lando is going to be on several builds. He is one of my absolute favorite pieces in the game. Because after you roll dice, you may spend 1 green token to reroll up to 2 of your results. Now, say you have overtune modulators, so you get 3 calculates. You just spend them for free rerolls because there's no limit on this as long as you have green tokens. So suddenly, whatever ship you've got him on is Boba Fett. Except you don't have to be close to enemy ships. And you can do it for offensive dice or defensive dice. It is very, very good. And it's any green token. So it could be a calculate or it could be a reinforce. So if you have a ship with low initiative that has a reinforce token, you benefit from the defense all the time. And then when it comes to your turn, you can use that reinforce for offense, which is great. He is awesome. We've talked several times about the value of those calculate tokens and then also the value of stressing your opposing ships. Maybe for all of those guys up there that have the Migs Mayfield Gunner upgrade. So 000 is at the start of the engagement phase, you may choose 1 enemy ship at range 0 to 1. If you do, gain 1 calculate token unless that ship chooses to gain 1 stress token. Now, this is particularly good on Afra, of course, because Afra's abilities, you may spend a green token to give a stress. So even if they're like, no, you can have the calculate, I don't want to stress, you give it to them anyway. Or give it to another ship they want stressed less. So that is very good ability. The range is a bummer, so is the 5 cost, but still, that's a really good utility piece. It's also a great one because it's always on. There's no downside to it, and you always gain something if it triggers. So either you stress an opposing ship, or you get a calculate. So you have like a free force token, which is great. We'll skip over Gonk, that which shall not be named. Lats Razzie is an interesting one too. I'm going to just run through most of the crew here, and I'll stop in a minute. Lats says, while you defend, if the attacker is stressed, you may remove 1 stress from the attacker to change 1 of your blank or eyeball results to an evade result. So makes you really defensive, especially in all these big base ships that have 2 evade dice. And there's no max on this. If your opponent's list gets stressed a lot, you got a bunch of this going on. So that is cool. Yeah, so that's an interesting one, but removing stress from your opponents is generally bad. But still, there's potential there. Grief Karga is one I always go back to, just never triggers. There's something there or will be, but you can coordinate allied ships as if they were friendly ships. He gives you a red coordinate action. And if you do coordinate a ship, it may acquire a lock on an object you have locked. Now, I really love that on Mandalorian pilots because they can take Mandalorian optics, which lets them acquire a free target lock in the system phase. And then in the following turn, they can coordinate a ship to give it a double mod. They can coordinate it to a focus lock, which is super strong, but it's difficult to trigger and you sacrifice a lot to do it. Now, the upside to that is you have a target lock and then this opposing ship does 2. So if you have 1 target you really need to kill, you now have 2 target locks on it instead of 1. So that's really good. I did this whole silly dance to go ahead and get to IG-11. We'll talk about some of the others on other pilots. I'll go ahead and skip ahead. But IG-11 is equip this side face up. Before you would be dealt a face-up damage card, could be from a crit, could be from a rock, could be from a self-bump, whatever. You must place one fuse marker on this card and gain one calculate token instead. So you just don't take a crit. You're like, nah, I'll get a force it back instead of a crit, which is so good. But then if there are two fuse markers on this card, flip it. So you cancel two face-up damage cards, and then you get this. During the end phase, remove one fuse marker from this card. Then if this card has no fuse markers on it, you are destroyed, and each other ship at range 0 to 1 suffers one critical damage. But then there's a counter to that, which is action. Place one fuse marker on this card. Now, I ran this on my Boba Fett in one of Gold Squadron podcast online tournaments on the Tabletop Simulator. It is really good. Boba one-on-one duked out and beat a Defender Vader and was still alive in the end because of this card, because he just canceled out two crits and then had just enough turns where he was able to do an action to place another fuse marker on this. So it's really good. Because once you get the anti-capture protocol, you have two turns, because one turn you remove one fuse, you've got one fuse left. Second turn, you remove your last fuse, and then you will blow up on that turn. Yeah, so obviously there's a downside. Surprisingly good on Hawks, because they don't have a lot of hull anyway, so it's not really that bad. But on something like Boba, you could cancel two crits, and then you'll have 6 hull left and still be one turn from blowing up all the time. So very good in a list where you have a coordinator or a ship that can get reliable actions. But it's a gamble. But whew, man, it's great to just be like, no, I'm not taking that crit. I don't want it. Really good on the Mandalorian if you do that and Beskar plating, because then you can choose between the two. It's like, do I want to Beskar this crit or do I want to IG-11 this crit? And because you can leapfrog them, you can get kind of the best of both worlds. 9 points to do that, but you can. All right, we're going to go through some other ships and then we'll get back to the crew. We'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, one thing okay, one more. What? No, we'll come back to it later. All right, back to the ships. This is going to be a long video, folks. Brace yourself. And if you're still with me at this point, good job. All right, so we're going to talk about the Spice Runner. When I was talking about Torkil Mux and the Hawk, I did go ahead and say that they had a list that was chock full of Spice Runners. The reason being, this is a 3-point ship with a turret, which is good. Got 3 hull and 2 shields, and then 2 evade, so that's not bad. It's surprisingly less bad than it looks on paper when you first think about it. You're like, wait a minute, you could have 6 of these? Wait. Yeah, you can have 6 of those in Bosk, but no, it wasn't 6, but it was just a bunch of them. So, but it's got just enough loadout at 4 for concussion bombs. And concussion bombs are 3 charges. During the system phase, if any of this card's charges are inactive, you must spend 1 charge to drop 1 concussion bomb using the 1 straight template, if able. Otherwise, you may spend 1 charge, your first charge, to drop 1 concussion bomb. So it's really good on something that has reloads. You can drop it and then reload, so you're not required to do it. But otherwise, you're just spewing bombs. And it's 4 points for a 3-charge bomb, which is really good, even if you have to drop it every time. Very scummy. I really love this upgrade, so I wanted to make sure to highlight it too. You can, on most ships, also include fuses. So you can choose to fuse them, so they're not really just messing you up. But you could take 3 of these guys for 9 points and then just have them just carpet bomb the entire board. But then your concussion bomb. So the effect of the bomb. At the end of the activation phase, this device detonates. When this device detonates, each ship and remote at range 0 to 1 is dealt 1 face-down damage card. So that goes under shields. Then each ship at range 0 to 1 must expose 1 damage card unless it chooses to gain 1 strain token. So it is such a good bomb. It just does the damage through shields. So if you do that to an A-Wing, that A-Wing is now 1 other concussion bomb away from dying. And if it happens to not want the strain token and chooses to risk flipping that, it could be a direct hit, and then it could just die in a single hit. So you can one-shot an A-Wing with these bombs. Likewise, the TIE Baron, same thing. Anything that has 2 hull does not like these things. So this is a great bomb. Definitely look at these in your Scum lists, and we'll talk about a couple of upgrades that may be why in just a minute. Next up, so in Scum, we have 2 3-point Y-Wings that are very, very good, and we'll talk about those in a second. But Scum also has some surprisingly good 4-point Y-Wings, and we're going to go ahead and talk about those too. Cavil being my personal favorite because he is initiative 5, which is great. His loadout is junk at 7, but he still has it. And you want your kind of ideal AC Cavil, you just do the dorsal turret, and then you do expert handling, so he gets white barrel rolls, and then R4 astromech, which changes that crappy dial and reduces the difficulty of all of your 1 to 2 speed basic maneuvers, which is really good on a Y-Wing because that gives you 2 blue hards, 2 blue banks, which is all it does. But that's very good. If it had a 1 hard, it would also give you blue 1 hards, which is nice. But Kaval's ability is while you perform a non-front arc attack, roll 1 additional attack die. And you also get range bonus from the dorsal turret. So if Kaval's at range 1 of opponents, he is shooting 4 dice out of a dorsal turret because it's 1 to 2 plus 1 for being range 1 plus 1 for being Kaval. That is a really, really scary attack. So he's throwing out of arc proton torpedoes, which you can mod by target locking or whatever you want. And again, an initiative 5 and a very reliable chassis that does die, but dies slowly because of that 6 hull and 2 evade. So Kaval is definitely one not to be ignored. For that just plain old-fashioned damage output and just being this simple basic piece. If you're trying to learn Scum, you want to have a competitive piece on the board that does a bunch of damage and doesn't die at a stiff breeze. Kaval's definitely a strong one to consider because he's very basic. He's just a ship that does what it does. He does it really well. So certainly consider him. There are other things you can do with him. He's got such little loadout that I wouldn't do much. You can, if you want a really, really reliable ion cannon, you can give him the ion cannon turret, but then he only has 2 additional points for anything. So you could do ion cannon turret then either of these, but not both. And that would let him throw 5 dice an ion. He'll only ever do 1 damage though, which is a bummer, but he's very reliably going to ion things. So if that's what you want, that's another way you can do this. I like him with the dorsal turret just because he does damage. Lots of damage. You want to do damage. You can, we'll talk about that in a second. Next up, I want to highlight Padrick, the humble napkin bomber, Padrick. Also a Y-Wing, which is also problematic. Also a 4-point Y-Wing, which is even more problematic. But he's initiative 3, and being one of the new Y-Wings, he has a tech slot instead of a mod slot. So I really wanted to highlight this build for Padrick because you can take thermal detonators, which is a 4-charge bomb for 5 points, because he's got 10 loadout. He's got a respectable loadout for a Y-Wing for once. And thermal detonators is a plain old-fashioned bomb, except when you drop it, you can drop 2 instead of just 1. And then the effect is at the end of the activation phase, this device detonates. When this device detonates, each ship and remote at range 0 to 1 rolls 1 attack die, which will be 2 if you drop 2 of them. Each ship gains 1 strain token for each eyeball result, and each ship and remote suffers 1 hit or critical damage for each matching result. So it's one of the bombs that can do crits. It is a die roll, so it's not that great, but still. Now, the reason this is really good, let's see. Yeah, so it can dish out strains, but then Padrick, after a friendly device that you have locked detonates, each enemy ship at range 0 to 1 of that device gains 1 strain token. So he already does the strain, which is great. So he's just dishing out strain all over the place, which is really, really good. It's like giving an enemy ship a tractor token with none of the downsides. It's not quite as good because it goes away, but still, you can strain enemy ships fairly aggressively with bombs and do damage. And the bonus that I've got on this guy is the Scum Staple Genius, the Astromech for 2 points. It says, after you fully execute maneuver, if you have not dropped or launched a device this round, you may drop 1 bomb. Any ship that has a bomb slot and an Astromech slot, you should strongly consider looking at Genius, because that's really good. It's one of the only options in the entire game to let you drop a bomb after moving, which is really, really good. And the downside is you're going to bomb yourself, bummer, unless you have boost or barrel roll to get you out of it, hopefully boost, which Padrick doesn't. So he's going to be bombing himself, which is not great. But still, that option to go ahead and move and then place bombs is incredibly powerful. And so I strongly consider putting that on basically anything out there, especially if you have the loadout, and thermal detonators are great. Now, alternatively, you can take the safer call in this, and instead of Genius, you can take R3 Astromech, which is you can maintain up to 2 locks. And the reason that's great is you drop your 2 thermal detonators, and then you can target lock both of them. So you're dishing out 2 strains. Yeah, because you have both. Yeah, so each detonation would do the damage, potentially dish out the strain from the bomb itself, and then also drop the strain from Padrick's target lock. So it may be a hat on a hat, but that is another way you can build this. And that's just a comical amount of strains, because you can have opposing ships have 4 strains if they roll badly. 1 for each of the 2 thermal detonators, and then 1 for each of the 2 target locked friendly devices. And they're guaranteed, if they're in range of that, to take at least 2 with that R3 build. So that's pretty good. He's a one-trick pony, so he doesn't have anything but that, but you can always slap a dorsal turret on him. And if you go the Genius route, because he's initiative 3 being a feature, he can also take automated target priority, which limits his options when he's shooting, but gives him a free passive mod that he can use while shooting as well. I love this Patrick build just because it's very fun, it's very surprising, and it has a surprising amount of utility, even if he is bombing himself. But it's there. Just consider it. And the thing about Genius is you don't have to use it. You can always drop it normally without using Genius, but in a pinch if you want to, you can. I wanted to be sure to highlight that because Patrick is good at initiative 3 on that, but Kaval's initiative 5. And so you can do just the thermal detonators in Genius, and then you can have Kaval do that at initiative 5. Or you can go the cheaper bomb and do the same route. It's still really good. Like he could have thermal detonators, and that's just a better delivery system for thermal detonators because you can get him where you want him to be rather than taking the setup turns to get there and then drop the thermal detonator. The other thing about Kaval is if you take seismic charges. Seismic charges, so you can remove rocks. The thing about Kaval too is he can take a modification, so he can take delayed fuses. So he can do that without bombing himself as much, which is good. Yeah, some weird fun stuff to think about. I really like those two, but then we're going to talk about Arlise, who is the somewhat lesser of the two 3-point Y-Wings, because Lima does sort of take the cake being initiative 5. But Arlise's ability is while you perform a forward arc attack, if you are damaged, you may change one of your eyeball results to a crit result. While you defend, if you're damaged before the modified defense dice step, you may change one of your eyeball results to a blank result. Now, a quirky thing you can do with Arlise is you bring two Y-Wings. You bring Lima and you bring Arlise. You give Lima concussion bombs. And then the first turn, you deliberately drop a concussion bomb on Arlise and then reload with Lima, so you don't have to drop bombs on yourself in the next few turns. And then Arlise triggers his ability while he still has shields up, because that would deal a single damage card under shields. And then it's turn 1, so you could take the strain and not even worry about it instead of flipping the damage card. Yeah, you can get the strain safely, and then you have 2 shields and 5 hull, and you already have your offensive ability triggered, which is, while you perform a front arc attack, if you are damaged, you may change one of your eyeball results to a crit result. While you defend, if you're damaged before the modified defense die step, you must change one of your eyeball results to a blank result, which is bad. But since you're probably not focusing all that much, could be a whole lot worse. He's only got 1 evade die, who cares? It's already going to be bad shots anyway. But yeah, the straight focus mod eyeball to a crit is so good. It's worth it. One thing you can do with Arlise, because it is a forward arc attack, is cluster missiles, because then that focus mod will trigger on both shots, as long as you're getting those target locks. You can see this is a build that appeared in a tournament recently. It's one I wanted to be sure to highlight, because it's got his ability, whether or not you do that weird gimmick with Lima where you do go ahead and trigger it. But then it's got advanced optics, so while you perform an attack, you may spend 1 focus token to change one of your blank results to a hit result, which is super good. You either use the focus for your focus mod offensively, or you get a blank to hit mod with advanced optics, and then you have your ion cannon turret, so it's a spectacularly accurate attack. So that is a really good combination. You can do the same with ion cannon turret or with dorsal turret. I prefer ion cannon because it's got more dice, and also you can potentially ion your opponents. That's a really, really good build that I'd never considered. I just had looked straight over advanced optics, but it's important to consider that, especially with Arlise, because of his passive mod. Underrated piece, Arlise. He's still your 3-point Y-Wing. He's a very, very good one. Okay, and we already talked about Fen Rao and where his floor is such an issue that it's a very risky piece to play. Still true. But I do want to go ahead and highlight some different builds for him that people don't necessarily use that will give you some extra utility. So one of the key things that separates Fen Rao from other Fang fighters is he's initiative 6, and he throws the extra die at range 1, so he can be an absolute piece of murder. But why not share his initiative 6? You can over here build him with swarm tactics. So at the start of the engagement phase, you may choose 1 friendly ship at range 1. If you do, that ship treats its initiative as equal to yours until the end of the round. My favorite combo with that is fly him with the 4-point initiative 3 Fang fighter. Oh, what's his name? We'll get to that. We'll get to him later. Oh God, what is he? I gotta find that. We'll come back to that. But there's the initiative 3 4-point Scum Fang fighter has the ability where after you perform an attack, if the defender was destroyed, you may then perform a bonus attack with some triggers and some caveats to it. But so if you swarm tactics him up to I6, you bring him and Fen screaming right in. Fen softens the sucker up, hitting it as hard as he can. I gotta look this up. Hang on a second. Bear with me here. blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure right now you're yelling at your screen who this guy's name is, because I know this. I know it. I'm going to remember the second before I actually click on it and see it. We're going to look it up. Da, 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 da. Drum roll, please. It is Torfun, of course, Torfun. Direct pressure, who says after you perform an attack, if the defender was destroyed, you may perform an action even while stressed. Then you may gain 2 strain tokens to perform a bonus attack. So you could target lock or focus and hit back really, really hard. That is really good. So Fenrau hits, softens it up, and then Torfun shoots at initiative 6. Hopefully initiative kills something, and then also gets an additional bonus shot at initiative 6. Super powerful combo. 10 points to do it in Fang Fighters, whose floor is, of course, rock bottom. But that is one of the things you can do. And you don't have to. If you bring Fen with Swarm Tactics, you can bump anything up to initiative 6 and do a little bit better on your offense. So that's really good. If you have a Gar Saxon Gunner Manaroo, you can shoot it at initiative 6 and throw your 4 dice. Real good. And then you still have points for the other stuff too. So you still got Beskar, Optics, and Clan Training. It's very common to see players running Fenrau with Burnout Thrusters as well, just as a delivery system, either to get him into an ideal position, or if you don't use it to do that, you can use it to nope out of an unfortunate position, which helps kind of raise his ceiling, raise his floor a little bit. The other thing you can do that's a little bit weirder is because you have Mandalorian Optics and Clan Training. So let's talk about that. Mandalorian Optics is that mod where in the system phase you may spend 1 charge to acquire a lock on an object in your forward arc. Then the bonus piece of text that everyone forgets is, while you perform a primary attack, if you have a lock on the defender, ignore obstacles beyond range 0 obstructing the attack. So you can shoot through a rock without them getting the defensive benefits, which is really good. But for me, before these upgrades came out, the biggest challenge I had with Fang Fighters is they throw a bunch of dice, but they don't have the lock to focus linked actions, and they really often are missing one or the other mod. Either you roll a fistful of eyeballs when you have a lock, or you roll all blanks when you have a focus. So having the lock you can do in the system phase is fantastic. And I very rarely leave home now if I'm bringing a Fang without Mandalorian Optics. And of course, then the Beskar Reinforced Plating is after or while you defend, if the attacker's in your forward arc, before you'd be dealt a face-up damage card, you may spend 1 charge to be dealt change a crit to a hit, or you can spend 2 charges to just discard it and not take the crit. And that's why I talked about that in combination with IG-11, because that's a great combo. The other piece here is Clan Training. Before you engage, if you're not focused and there is an enemy ship in your forward arc at range 1, you may spend 1 charge, and it's got 1, to perform a red focus action. After you perform an attack, if the defender is destroyed, recover 1 charge. So it's really good because that turns the Fang Fighter's entire bar into a link to focus. So suddenly you have the lock to red focus action built into that Clan Training. Now, of course, you have to get the kills to benefit from it, but that is so good. And especially on Fen being initiative 6, you have because it's before you engage, he has the opportunity to do that and hold the focus if he wants to, if you don't use it on offense, or if you don't want to use it on offense. Really, really good. Of course, it's got diminishing returns the lower initiative ship you put it on, but if you're running Swarm Tactics Fenrau, stocks are back up. So I like this build better personally. This one also over here, you notice it has Electronic Baffle instead of Beskar because Squad Leader is 1 more point than Swarm Tactics. This is another one I wanted to suggest. I think this is more meme worthy than the Swarm Tactics version, but with Squad Leader, you give Fen, your initiative 6 Fang Fighter, coordinate. So it's the opportunity to coordinate at initiative 6, which is really good. Even if it's not really what he's supposed to be doing, it still is an extra piece of utility I haven't seen people try. I don't really see a need for it, whereas I do see a need for Swarm Tactics. Swarm Tactics is amazing. If you're running Fen with any number of other Fang Fighters, consider this build. This is a really good way to have him actually be a squad leader. The Swarm Tactics doesn't take an action, you just do it. It's like, whoop, there you go. And that again makes their Clan Training better. So both of you can then focus lock and then shoot at initiative 6. It's good. All right, let's go ahead and talk about Lebo. The YT2400 did come out. Signature of Scum, it's got the 2 evade dice with 4 shields and 6 hull. Unlike your usual Scum ships, it does have a better ratio of shields to hull than most of them, so that's really good. I think those are fire spray stats. Yes, we see a fire spray blow. Perfect. And again, having those 2 evade, it's remarkably durable. Of course, we only get the quick build, so you can't play with any builds, but whatever. But the thing that I like particularly about Lebo is he's 6 points, which is awesome, but then he's also completely independent. He's a fast ship. Like, look at that dial. That dial is crazy. This sucker can rocket all over the place. Has easy ability to rotate his arc if you want to. You want not to as often as possible. But one of the really cool things about him is that he does get 2 calculate tokens every time he does every time he does a calculate action, he gets 2 tokens. But then also, very, very cool, he can then at the end phase spend an unspent calculate to acquire a lock. So he's got double mods almost every turn without any assistance, which is so good. And it's exactly something that Scum is really missing. So this guy should slot into a lot of your lists. Give him a try. He's a lot better than he looks on paper. Very hard to bring down, very, very fast, and does a lot of damage, especially in conjunction with other damage heavy ships like a YV or something also kind of backing him up. We have quite a bit more to talk about. I think I may go ahead and stop it here because I think my headset is dying. And also this has gotten quite long. So we're going to do a part 2. We'll leave it here. Hopefully this is warrants coming back for part 2. And then I will not only finish up the weird ship builds I've got talking about so far, I'll also look at a couple actual squad lists. So hopefully this is worth something. And yeah, till next time.